On September 8, 1981, in Houston, Texas, 15-year-old Annette Criver and her mother, Mary Rose, were selling items that had belonged to Annette's late father and Mary's husband, who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier in their backyard. Mary was unaware, but Annette was still deeply affected by the loss of her father. She spent a lot of time alone, writing poetry, drawing, playing the guitar, and singing. Her mother even asked her if she wanted to see a specialist to talk about it, but she replied that she was fine. During this time, Annette met 40-year-old Felix Vale. Perhaps it was because Annette missed her father so much, or because Felix possessed an incredible charm, but the girl became seriously infatuated with him. Her mother didn't see any threat in the man who appeared in their backyard on a motorcycle. After all, he was older than Annette. She noticed her daughter talking to him but assumed he was just another customer. Indeed, to be honest, Mary was too preoccupied with her own affairs to be vigilant. After her husband's death, she needed to find work, but she couldn't secure a job anywhere in Houston. Therefore, when an opportunity arose in the neighboring state of Oklahoma, she decided to move, leaving Annette in the care of a close friend so that her daughter could finish school in peace while she settled in her new place. It seemed like the ideal solution for everyone, but Mary soon deeply regretted it when she learned that the mysterious stranger was getting closer to her underage daughter. Annette didn't hide from her mother that her new friend occasionally dropped by, but her mother couldn't have imagined that her daughter's relationship with a man much older than her had gone so far. As it turned out, Felix would come very, very often. Annette seemed as if her mother had abandoned her, and Felix adeptly exploited her vulnerability. He easily managed to subjugate Annette to his influence and convinced her to go on a trip with him on his motorcycle after finishing school. At the same time, Mary, who was unaware of this, had been working hard for months to share excellent news with her daughter. She had bought a house for them, listing both of them as the owners. They could live together again. When the woman found out that her daughter had already left with Felix to aimlessly wander the country, she was distraught. Mary reproached herself for not being there with her daughter, for not making a different decision. Annette and Felix were living off the allowance Annette received after her father's death. She wrote letters to her mother, and a year later she called and asked for Mary's permission to marry Felix. The woman tried to persuade her daughter to wait until she turned 18, but she was adamant. Either they would marry with her permission in California, or they would go to Mexico and get married there. Understanding that she essentially had no choice, and fearing that refusal would push her daughter away, Mary agreed. Besides, Mary didn't know Felix, and she thought that if her daughter loved him, he must be a decent man. But soon after the wedding, Annette's letters increasingly hinted that Felix had changed. Imperceptibly, he had gained complete control over her life and even coerced his young wife into undergoing an illegal abortion when she became pregnant. Shocked, the mother urged her daughter to come home, and Annette found the courage to break free from Felix's grip and return to her mother. Despite Annette living back at home with her mother, it seemed as though only her shell had returned, while her soul remained somewhere else. She was not herself, lost. When the video was made, the mother and daughter were painting the walls in their new home, and Annette looked straight into the camera with that tense gaze as if saying, "What do you want from me?" Mary thought Annette was shaken by the extent to which Felix could influence her, but even if her daughter was no longer herself, the mother was happy that she was back home. Unfortunately, the respite was short-lived. Felix began cutting their phone lines, demanding to speak to his wife, and a few weeks later he simply showed up, walked in without permission, and headed straight for Annette. They spent some time together, after which they demanded that Mary leave the house. Mary did her best to resolve this issue with her daughter, but Felix's influence was too great, as the purchase of the house was funded not only by Mary's savings but also by the money of her late husband, Annette's father. And as the two women were listed as owners, Mary had no choice but to give in. She didn't want to leave her daughter for the second time, but she gave up her half of the house, packed her things, and moved to California. Soon Annette turned 18 and was able to access the money left to her as an inheritance from her father, around $100,000. Most of the sum went toward paying off Felix's debts. Annette also transferred the ownership of the house to him. Upon learning of this, Mary immediately called her son-in-law, but he told her that he had put her daughter on a bus and she was heading to Mexico. Supposedly, she set off on a journey for spiritual enlightenment and was planning to change her name so that she would never be found or bothered. His story made no sense, especially since the bus stop from which Annette supposedly left simply did not exist. Therefore, not believing a word from her son-in-law, Mary called the police to report her daughter's disappearance. Officers visited Felix, but unfortunately for Mary, he appeared as charming to them as her daughter had found him 3 years earlier. He easily convinced them that the girl had left on her own. Mary continued to try to contact the authorities, but since they refused to investigate the disappearance without any evidence, the woman was left with nothing but hope. Over the years, Mary sat by the phone waiting for a call on Christmas, on her and Annette's birthdays, on Mother's Day, expecting the girl to call and say, "Hi, Mom." But the years went by, and more doubts crept into her mind. She wondered why, if her daughter didn't want to see her, she wouldn't let other relatives know about her, especially since the mother had always supported her daughter, never pushed her away, and Annette couldn't hide her resentment over the years. After 7 years and hundreds of letters to the police, the FBI, and personally to Felix, all of which went unanswered, Mary decided she had had enough. She was not going to wait any longer for the police to take any action and began her own investigation. It is worth noting that the internet was only just emerging at that time, and any information had to be gathered piecemeal from various sources. She started with one solid lead she could find, Sue Jordan, Felix's sister, and traveled halfway across the country to meet her. After talking with her, Mary Rose received confirmation that her daughter could have been a victim of a crime, as Annette was not the only one of Felix's lovers who had come to harm. Sue told her that Felix had a wife, Mary Horton, who died under mysterious circumstances. Armed with this new information, Mary called someone she believed could help her piece together the full picture. Mary Horton's younger brother, Will Horton, had always suspected, along with his parents, that his sister's death was a murder, and his suspicions were further solidified when he answered Mary Rose's call in the early 2000s. Will didn't hold back any details about what he knew about the case. He was 15 years old when his older sister drowned in the Calcasieu River in Louisiana. Mary Horton met Felix in 1960 while attending college. They married 6 months later, and exactly 1 year after their wedding, their son Bill Vale was born. After Bill's birth, everything changed in the family, so much so that Mary fled to her parents with her son. She wanted to divorce her husband, but in those days the word divorce was almost taboo, especially for the Catholic family that the Hortons were. Therefore, her mother persuaded Mary to return home and try to reconcile with her husband, but she died before she could reach out to him. As Felix recounted, he and Mary asked their relatives to look after their 3-month-old son and took a friend's boat to go fishing, although Felix had never been known to engage in such a hobby before. The couple was 5 miles away from the shore, with Mary in the front of the boat holding a flashlight when she noticed a log sticking out of the water. Felix quickly turned the boat, and due to the sharp maneuver, Mary fell into the water. He jumped in to try to find her before returning to the shore and informing the police. From the outset, the police suspected him of lying because to return to the shore, he would have had to navigate 5 miles past other boats, docks, and encounter numerous people along the way. Why didn't he ask them for help? Additionally, Felix claimed that he and his wife intended to cast their fishing lines, but no fishing gear was found in the lake, which was generally considered unsuitable for fishing. It was also strange that Mary boarded the boat without a life jacket. The thing was, she had a severe fear of drowning. It was her phobia, so why didn't she wear the life jacket? According to Felix, she was breastfeeding the baby, and during this period, any additional clothing on her chest caused discomfort. Despite her fear of drowning, Mary knew how to swim and should have been able to make it to the shore. Felix insisted that she must have hit her head on a rock in the water, but there were no rocks in that part of the lake. Felix was arrested, but not found guilty because the case never made it to court. 2 days later, Mary's body was retrieved from the water. A scarf was wrapped around her mouth and neck. No water was found in her lungs. There was a large open wound on the back of her head, as if she had been struck by some object, and the sleeves of her sweater were covered in blood. Additionally, it was evident that she had been dragged. Everything indicated murder. However, to the coroner's astonishment, a different opinion formed. The coroner concluded that Mary drowned as a result of an accident. How could a murder case be investigated if the coroner said it wasn't murder? Felix had to be released. After his wife's death, he received an insurance payout but didn't even pay for her funeral. In fact, he had taken out 2 insurance policies in Mary's name for $150,000 each, $500,000 in today's terms. One policy had been fully paid out several months before the accident. However, the insurance company suspected the husband and only paid him a portion of the money. Thus, the young widower Felix Vale retained his freedom, received the money, and once again roamed the cities in search of his next romantic adventure. And the next serious romance Felix got involved in was with Sharon Hensley, as Mary Rose told Will Horton. Sharon's mother contacted the Horton family, hoping they knew something about the whereabouts of Felix and her daughter, who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Once again, Mary Rose set out, this time to Bismarck, North Dakota, to meet Sharon's brother Brian Hensley. Sharon worked as a model, was professionally involved in dance, and was a very free-spirited young woman, like many young people in America in the late 60s. After his wife's death, Felix also fell under the spell of the hippie lifestyle. He became a wandering preacher, the leader of his own cult, the Holy Order of Mans. Around this time, he met 21-year-old Sharon, who set out on a trip to California. Despite the 10-year age difference, she was taken with him. Felix and Sharon didn't work but lived on the road, moving from vineyard to vineyard and mostly subsisting on grapes. He increasingly abused illicit substances and behaved more aggressively towards the girl. Her brother was certain that at that moment she stayed with him out of fear, not knowing how to extricate herself from this situation. During a visit to the girl's family, her relatives were horrified at the sight of her. The former model and dancer, she had always been beautiful, athletic, and fit. Now Sharon looked exhausted and lost. When she was asked a question, she only answered after Felix gave his permission. Soon Sharon called her mother for the last time, as it turned out. Felix must have been standing next to her, listening to every word, but even from her daughter's voice, her mother understood that the girl was in danger. However, the family was unable to do anything. By 1973, Sharon had stopped contacting her relatives and friends, and they did not know that she had disappeared for a whole year when Felix wrote to them, presenting a fantastic story that Sharon had left him to go to Australia on a boat with two strangers she had met in Florida. Felix told the Hensley family roughly the same thing that he would later tell Annette's mother, that she wanted to start a new life with a new identity and burned all documents before fleeing. Interestingly, initially the two Australians were called John and Vanessa, but later, Felix used different names. He supposedly didn't know their surnames at all. Of course, the Hensleys didn't buy it and reported their daughter missing, but with no evidence, the police had nothing to work with. Felix's tactic was clear. He took his daughters as far away from their mothers as possible before writing them letters stating that the girls no longer wanted to be contacted. What irony, Felix Vale always spoke of the girls' desire for freedom, but he completely controlled their lives and rarely let them go. Sharon Hensley never returned, and no one ever saw her again. From 1975 to 1977, several other very young girls became Felix's wives, but these marriages were very short-lived, which probably saved these girls' lives. Then in 1981, Felix Vale met 15-year-old Annette Crever. What happened to Mary and Felix's son, Bill, during all this time? At first, the young father left his son in the care of his parents, but when he went to California, he took the child with him. Mary Horton's family had no idea that Bill was forced to follow his father wherever he went. The boy suffered from his father's aggression until he was 8 years old when he ran to a police station in search of any help he could find. He told the officers that his father made him take illicit substances, supposedly to expand his consciousness, but he just wanted to go home. This led to the arrest of Felix and Sharon. After their arrest, Bill had to testify against his father. 3 months later, they were released, and they continued to travel together, while the boy went to live with his maternal grandparents. Mary Rose believed that a visit to the now grown-up Bill could provide her with more evidence and clues about his father's whereabouts. She packed her things again and headed to Kansas to meet Bill and his family. Like previous visits, this one went quite well. Bill turned out to be an open, kind, and understanding person, but he was horrified at the thought of his father. He wanted Felix to stay as far away from his wife and children as possible, but he agreed to take the risk to seek justice for his mother. It was the man's story that confirmed all of Mary's fears. When the boy was 8 years old, before he ran to the police, he accidentally overheard a conversation between Felix and Sharon. Felix told the girl that he had killed Bill's mother. Sharon obviously didn't understand and began to calm him down, saying that it was natural for him to feel responsible for her death. But Felix replied, "No, you don't understand, I really killed her." After Felix's arrest, Bill was adopted by his maternal grandparents. but the fear of his father remained. He couldn't stop thinking that Felix would come back someday. He did indeed show up 5 years later, claiming that he just wanted to see his son. The boy was puzzled that Sharon wasn't with him, and his father told him that she would never bother anyone again. The boy understood what that meant but couldn't share it with anyone. From that day on, Bill was certain that if he revealed this secret, he or his family could become the next victims. However, he responded to Mary Rose's request because he also wanted justice for his mother, Sharon, and Annette. Although Bill died of cancer in 2009, he asked the priest to record his words confessing Felix. After decades of searching, Mary Rose believed that now she had a case against Felix. There was still no physical evidence, but she believed that the testimonies of the Hortons, Hensley, her own, and Felix's son Bill could convince the FBI that the cases needed to be reopened. Unfortunately, it was precisely at this time that government budget cuts had a significant impact on the entire department of unsolved cases at the FBI, and once again, no one was willing to listen to Mary. She was ashamed that she had stirred up trouble, given hope to the families of the victims, and now it had all ended before it even began. In June 2011, almost 30 years after her daughter's disappearance, Mary Rose was listening to the radio at home when a program featuring an investigative reporter who had solved several high-profile cases began. In particular, he had uncovered a series of 8 murders that had remained unsolved for almost 50 years. Mary sat in her living room, stunned as she listened, and then realized that this man was not afraid of unsolved cases, and she needed to contact him. She didn't waste a minute, picked up the phone, and quickly managed to get in touch with the reporter from Mississippi, Jerry Mitchell. She asked him straight up, "Jerry, if you knew that a serial killer was on the loose, would you be interested in the case?" "Of course," he replied without hesitation, and Mary told him about Felix Vale. She tried to explain all the pieces of the puzzle that she had gathered, but one detail became known to her only recently. Felix had returned to Mississippi. It was a coincidence that could be taken as a sign from above. Mary had one more card up her sleeve. She had obtained Felix's exact address and was eager to pay him a surprise visit. Jerry's reaction to her idea was unexpected. He volunteered to go with her, so they set off to the provided address, a remote trailer park. As they circled Felix's residence, Mary noticed that the owner was not at home, but the back window of the trailer had been smashed. She crawled inside through it. Jerry couldn't shake off the thought that the homeowner might return any minute, but Mary remained undeterred. At 64 years old, she was tired of Felix Vale. She was determined to get to the truth, no matter the cost. Inside, with a camera in hand, she found a multitude of religious texts related to the cult and various weapons, but nothing that could be useful in their investigation. When Mary emerged from the trailer, she and Jerry noticed someone running toward them. It wasn't Felix, but one of his sisters, Kay Faulkner, who also lived in the trailer park. Initially, she didn't like their intrusion, but when they explained the reason for their visit, her expression changed. Kay stated that she, too, believed her brother had something to do with the girls' deaths. Felix had been uncontrollable since childhood, never acknowledging anyone's authority to the point that at 17, he was rejected when he tried to become a pilot. He had successfully passed all the tests and scored top marks, indicating impressive intellectual abilities, but his difficult nature and defiance would have been a problem during service. Even Felix's own family believed in his guilt because of his temperament. Pleasantly surprised that his first day of investigation had yielded so much fruit, Jerry Mitchell got to work. He listened to Bill Vale's testimony, spoke with the Hortons, Hensley, and Mary Rose, and he began to write. Of course, he had other projects as well, so the book was released 4 years later. However, it garnered numerous awards and created such a stir that the FBI employees reopened the cases. Felix was arrested 7 months after Jerry's work emerged. Mary Horton's case, the one that offered hope for a trial, had only her body found. But since her death had been deemed an accident, the police had never searched for or preserved any evidence related to her death. Nearly 50 years later, neither the police who worked on the case nor any evidence could be found. And yet they still needed to find the perpetrator, someone daring enough to take on a seemingly hopeless case. Hugh Holland turned out to be just the right person. Fortunately for him, private investigator Gina Frenzel learned about the case and decided to work on it pro bono. Gina enjoyed working undercover and managed to gain Felix's trust. When he was arrested, he gave her permission to visit his house. There, among the vast array of swords and cult literature, She found hidden stacks of personal journals that the man had been writing from the 1980s until 2010. His journals were incredibly detailed, filled with everyday things, such as what he had for breakfast in the morning. Felix admitted that he aimed to control every woman in his life and didn't shy away from physical violence. He even had a paragraph about how he enjoyed drinking fresh blood, but made no confessions of murder. Particularly, entire sections of the journals were missing precisely during the periods when something happened to Mary, Sharon, and Annette. Gina found only one indirect admission from the man. After his mother's death, Felix had to clean out the attic he occupied and burn part of the journals he kept there. During that time, he wrote that with all the family situations, and as he revisited and burned the journals, he learned to resolve conflicts without resorting to murder. Gina also found a birth certificate and a photo for Annette's passport in his house. This meant that the girl couldn't have gone to Mexico without documents since she didn't have a driver's license yet. But this was still not enough for the court, and the prosecutor began to search for witnesses. Incredibly, they found one. It was Ike Ebscher. Holland went to Ike's house to meet him. He was greeted by a 90-year-old man in a wheelchair, but fortunately, with a clear memory. Ike was a neighbor of Felix when he lived in Lake Charles. Ike's father owned a large boat, and the sheriff's office reached out to him to help search for Mary's body. Ike was on his father's boat when they found the body. He recounted that when Mary was pulled out of the water, everyone realized it was murder because her neck was swollen, and the scarf wasn't just wrapped around her neck and mouth, but was deeply inserted into her throat, clearly serving as a gag. But Ike didn't limit himself to memories of that day alone. He gave the prosecutor an envelope containing 2 photographs of Mary's body. The prosecutor didn't even expect to find anything like that since the police hadn't preserved any crime scene photos. With the evidence and the witness, the prosecutor charged Felix with the murder of his first wife. Ike was key to the case. Without his testimony, presenting those photos in court, it would have been impossible to prove it was a murder. 3 months after giving his testimony in court, Ike passed away, but the truth he managed to reveal was heard by the jury. Several more witnesses appeared in court. They were friends with Felix during the period when the man was married to Mary. He confessed to them that Mary was pregnant again. She thought that the birth of their second child would save their marriage. In reality, Felix didn't want even one child and hence killed her. In 2016, just 10 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Felix guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. During the sentencing, members of all 3 families sat together, holding hands. Over the years, thanks to Mary Rose's relentless pursuit of the truth, they had become one family. Of course, Felix was not convicted for what they believed he had done to the other girls, but 1, additional charges would not have affected the sentence. He would still have been sentenced to life imprisonment. 2, from their point of view, justice and truth still prevailed. The oldest unsolved case in the history of the United States ceased to be so and was solved after 54 years.